Welcome everyone again to the University of New Mexico Law and Mental Health Series, weekly discussions of practice and science featuring experts in behavioral health and the law. This is a series run by the Division of Forensic Behavioral Sciences of the University of New Mexico's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences in support with the New Mexico Behavioral Health Services Division. I'm Anthony Perillo, the Forensic Psychology Training Director here at the University of New Mexico. For our talk today, if you have any questions for our presenters, you can find the Q&A box. You can enter those questions anytime you like, but just know that we do hold the questions till the end, and oftentimes it's not possible for us to get to all of them. If you are pursuing continuing medical education credits, there will be a sign-in sheet posted as I finish this sentence right now in the chat box. If you are pursuing APA continuing education credits, that link for the certificate and survey that you'll complete will also be in the chat box, but near the end of the presentation, near the top of the next hour. So keep your eye as we start to wrap up on the chat box there. Make sure that you bookmark the link if you're not going to open it before we exit the webinar, and make sure you save your certificate after the fact because we don't have access to the certificate portion after the fact. If you missed last week's talk in the series, Dr. Meena Redkalkar's eye-opening discussion of practicing strategies for enhancing cultural responsiveness and forensic assessments is now available on our UNM YouTube channel. The recording for this week's talk should also be available on the YouTube channel later this week, and PowerPoint slides accessible for people that have registered for the series later in the week as well. As a heads up for next week's talk, next week we have Dr. Leah Roller and Dr. Danielle Rinchak, who will be discussing practical applications of anti-racism into forensic mental health practice. But circling back to this week, I'm really excited to introduce you to today's panel, who will be discussing intersections of financial instability, severe mental illness, and involvement in the criminal legal system. This is Dr. Lauren Kois and Dr. Eric Elbogen. Dr. Lauren Kois is a clinical forensic psychologist and research assistant professor of psychiatry and neurobehavioral sciences at the University of Virginia School of Medicine's Institute of Law, Psychiatry, and Public Policy. Prior to joining ILPPP in 2023, she served as an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Alabama. Her research, clinical, and consulting activities center on forensic mental health, with a particular focus on developing evidence-reformed, recovery-oriented services for people with severe mental illness and criminal legal involvement. In 2023, she was the recipient of the American Psychology Law Society and the American Academy of Forensic Psychology's Saleem Shah Early Career Development Award, as well as the Psychologist in Public Service Criminal Justice Division's Early Career Achievement Award. Dr. Eric Elbogen is a professor of psychiatry at Duke University and director of the VA National Financial Veterans Resource Center. Dr. Elbogen led a Department of Education-funded study developing and testing steps for achieving financial empowerment, a recovery-oriented money management intervention for veterans with severe mental illness. He also has conducted empirical research identifying links between financial strain and suicidal ideation, criminal legal involvement, homelessness, and violence. I'll just add, in addition to just being phenomenal scholars, both of these people simply walk the walk in terms of aiming to make legally involved people's lives better. It's really admirable, the strength and focus of their work. Dr. Kois, Dr. Elbogen, Lauren, and Eric, on behalf of the University of New Mexico, it's an honor to have you joining our series, and we're really excited for you sharing your expertise in this area for today. I'll go ahead and toss it over to you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Okay. Hi, everybody. Dr. Perillo, thank you for having us. I can say a little bio for you. I went to grad school with Dr. Perillo, and he was definitely nicest guy in the program. I saw Dr. Colombino's on as well, so she can vouch for me. But we are excited to be presenting this for you all today. Eric and I are going to go back and forth in terms of the presentation. So you all already heard what we do, who we are. We will say that we don't have any conflict of interest in terms of financial arrangements regarding the content of this activity. Even though it's about money, we have no conflict of interest. Okay, so learning objectives is we're going to talk about this relationship between financial instability, criminal legal involvement, and serious mental illness. As well as how we've been adapting this intervention to fit within a risk-need responsivity framework, specifically an intervention that Eric developed over 10 years ago called Steps for Achieving Financial Empowerment, also referred to as SAFE with a $sign. for individuals with serious mental illness and criminal legal involvement. And then we're going to tell you about a Bureau of Justice Assistance funded project that we have. Eric, myself, and Dr. Jennifer Cox are the lead investigators on that study. So we're going to talk about how we're co-designing that with participants in mental health court, as well as case managers, judges, and interested community partners. So all of you all in here are already familiar with what our jails look like, as well as what our state hospitals look like. Now that number, in some states, that number is higher in terms of how many forensic beds are in civil hospitals. Everyone's probably familiar with, if you're working especially in the public sector, familiar with the incompetent to stand trial wait list, also referred to as the competence crisis. And for some of you all that know me, you might be like, what's the competency lady doing talking about money? But I got interested in this because of the growing competence crisis. So when you think about like, how did we get here? More and more people are being referred and more people are being found incompetent. So more people with serious mental illness are more symptomatic, more acute, chronic, getting arrested, and they're often more impaired. So we're seeing those climbing numbers of people that are incompetent. So the system is overtaxed. Right now, there's not enough off-ramps, although that is something that people are working on in many systems. And this stems from the criminalization of mental illness and substance misuse in terms of kind of what that mental illness and substance use can lead to in someone's life. We'll get to that in just a second. Just to demonstrate the number of increasing arrests, this is a paper by Barbara McDermott and colleagues that looked at California Department of State Hospital incompetent to stand trial admissions at Napa State Hospital. And they found that between 2009 and 2016, the number of IST defendants that were admitted to the hospital for restoration doubled, the percentage doubled of those who had more than 15 prior arrests. So at least out of Napa, we do have this evidence that I think is pretty demonstrative of the rest of the country that people are getting arrested more and more. So what could be explaining that? I love this paper by Drs. Merrill Rotter and Michael Compton about social determinants of health and how social determinants of mental health as well there's many overlapping with criminal legal involvement. And the paper talks about a cause and consequence because they're cyclical. They inform each other. Once you're at risk for one, you're at risk for the other. And we'll come back to that when we start talking about safe and forensic a little later. Later on, I'm going to put this article in the chat because I think it's really great and it's definitely worth checking out. So that's what got me interested in social determinants of health. I'll also say, I'll give another John Jay shout out. Dr. Lauren Gonzalez, who was in my cohort, has been interested in this for a long time in the context of criminalization of mental illness. And I just kind of fell into it in the last couple of years, and it makes a lot of sense of what's explaining the increasing arrests. And we'll talk about what SAFE has to do with that. Eric?
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Anthony, for having us. And what SAFE has to do with a lot of what Lauren was talking about is when I was working in a forensic unit and state hospital, began to realize and doing risk assessments, both for suicide and violence, there was this component of the risk management plan of, we're going to have a patient who's going to be living in the community. What does it mean to have success in the community? And it gets to those social determinants of health. It wasn't only mental health, but it was also financial well-being. And what began to realize is that money is part of the patients that you're seeing, their lives on a daily basis. Social well-being, their living environment, their vocational, what they're going to be doing for work. It began to be clear to me that this was a real important topic to look at in terms of risk assessment and other forensic topics. Lauren, next slide. So this is from this is data from the NESARC, and it was a nationally representative study conducted by NIAAA of 35,000 Americans. They followed them for 3 years. And what you see on the bottom is the number of those risk factors they had at the beginning of the study. And then I counted the number of them, we did. And then we looked at how well that predicted actual suicide attempts in the next 3 years. And what you could see is that that is a 20-fold increase. And I should mention for those that want to know, that's a predicted probability, which controls for a lot of risk factors. So there was a unique contribution of financial strain on suicide, and you could see how strong that was. That's 20 times higher. Next slide, Lauren. And what we began to see is each one of those really predicted whether or not these are adults in the United States, representative sample, whether or not they attempted suicide in the next few years. And you could see past homelessness, income, being unemployed, and being in financial crisis or debt. Next slide. So the year after, researchers used machine learning to look at this data set. And there were over 2,500 predictors of suicide in this data set. They listed the top 20, and you can see at number 7 is experienced that financial crisis or unable to pay bills. But it didn't stop there. Next slide. There's also work, income. These are the variables that we happen to pick, conceptualizing financial well-being as related to suicide attempts. But this means that of the top 20 risk factors in a nationally representative survey, controlling, you could see a lot of those are mental health, but this shows that for suicide, it's also a social health issue. And so not only did the NESARC show that it was strong for, and so that was machine learning using statistics are well beyond anything I hope no one asks me to elaborate on, but I could tell you that it really replicated what we found and showed that it's so important for suicide. But also, there are a number of studies in the NESARC that looked at the link between those variables, that financial crisis variable, for example, or low income, and we summarized that last year. There was a lot of research that shows that financial well-being is and strain is related to increased risk of violence, including severe violence. And you could see this is well known. It's employment instability is part of intimate partner violence and sex offending. And if you look at the United States Secret Service, the National Threat Assessment Center, if you look at a number of those reports, the family financial difficulty in over 2/3 of those families of the students who perpetrated the school violence, and also perpetrators of mass attacks. You begin to see this is both for violence and suicide, a pretty important risk factor to consider. Next slide. And what about criminal legal involvement? This looks at the NSDUH. This is a nationally representative sample. And we're currently looking at this in the data. We want to look at, well, how about just pure like poverty? What percentage of people who fall into those categories are below the poverty level? And what you could see, it's those individuals who had both criminal legal involvement history beforehand and mental illness. And I think that talks about, as Lauren's going to share, adapting safe for the group on the right. It shows that there's a real need, an economic need for this very vulnerable population. Next slide. So we have financial well-being is related to suicide. It's related to violence. It's related to criminal legal involvement. What about homelessness? And because what you could see from the odds ratio there is that having above $50,000 a year income was related to a 70% lower chance of becoming homeless in the next year. But this is a multivariable analysis. And what this shows is that regardless of income or mental health diagnosis or history of arrest, mismanaging one's money and having money management problems like bouncing checks or forging checks or going over one's credit card was related to quadruple the rate of homelessness a year later. And I have a figure on the next slide that shows this too. So what you could see, I think this is kind of an interesting slide because the bar on the left and the bar on the right are what you'd expect, right? If you're good at managing your money and you have high income, low chance of homelessness. Opposite all the way on the right. Poor at managing your money and lower income, much higher rate. But it's the two in the middle that are most interesting. What that means is that actually it's a little bit more if you actually were making more than $50,000 a year, but had those money management problems, you actually had a higher rate of homelessness than if you had lower income. So what this shows is that income is important, but how you manage that income is equally important. And that's where beginning to look at financial education, financial literacy, you could actually think about, you could go back, Lawrence, so sorry. If you can't, that's fine. If you think about the two bars on the right, the only difference between them is not income, it's how well they use their money. So imagine an intervention that moves someone from that right bar to the one right next to it. You could reduce their risk from 14% to 3.9% by just helping individuals manage their money better. So that makes for a cheap intervention, pun intended. And so but the thing is, okay, great. It's related to assessment. We see this research can you really help people manage their money better? And a meta-analysis says that you can. And in fact, for all of you on this call, if you're working with clients or even for yourselves, you could better your money management right now by, if you have a goal, add a value. Why is this important to you? So we know about SMART goals. I want to save $4,000 to go to the Grand Canyon in December. I'm going to save $500 a month. Begin to make a SMART goal. But say that same thing and add, well, because I want my family to have something that they remember for the rest of their lives, or I love nature, or I've always wanted to go to the Grand Canyon. Just adding that value, that reason for the financial goal, that actually increases the chances that you will reach your goal. And also imagining your future self, connecting to your future self. And we're going to talk about how our interventions do that, has been shown to be have a medium effect size for improving savings. Next slide. The CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, has recently, it's a presentation they did last year, but has actually published it on their website, a number of principles for financial education. Among them is building motivation and really beginning to recognize that a lot of people, a lot of patients, clients, talking about financial well-being is tough. There's stress related to it. There might be embarrassment if someone's been scammed. People don't necessarily want to share and talk about money or think about ways of improving their own money management. So you really have to address really begin to build in some motivational interviewing kinds of strategies and focus on skills that someone wants, make it client-centered. Next. And a lot of times people with lower income might start this intervention and say, I barely have enough money to get by, and they feel very disempowered. And if you have them record their expenses for 1 week, and then they begin to see, oh my gosh, I am spending $80 a week on coffee, I could bring that down. And then you begin to help them figure out if they just make it on their own, they could save $50 a week. And you multiply that by 52 weeks, and you've helped empower them to save $2,500. That's what financial education should and can be. Next. So I mentioned the need to improve engagement with motivational interviewing, and these are some of the strategies that we'll talk about as we go more into the safe intervention, which is right now. So, what is safe? Those are steps for achieving financial well-being. We had in an original study 5 steps where we wanted, in this case, they were veterans with psychiatric disabilities to learn how to save more money, to budget effectively. A lot of people thought that if they worked, they would lose their disability, and they also didn't know how to connect to vocational training or jobs. We helped them with that. Even more so now than when we started this, scams were not part of a lot of the financial education 10 years ago, and now they're a critical part. If we did have a survey right now of you and asked if you know someone who's been scammed, I would hazard a guess to say that there would be a pretty high percentage of you that did. And we're going to talk about that and helping protect people from scams in a little bit. And then really not just learning and education, but what are the resources that are available out there? Next slide. So, I think that here you could see some of the very quick strategies from the SAFE intervention that we are just starting off by trying to come up with some quick strategies to improve savings. So we have what is the ideal thermostat temperature, making sure your light bulbs are fluorescent. Coin jars, amazingly, if you keep them within 10 feet of your door, you will save more than them ending up in your couches or lost elsewhere. And a lot of participants in the study shared that they would save hundreds of dollars a year by doing that after. And asking for discounts. A lot of people don't do it. We have an activity where one of the top expenses is eating out, and to show people what they would save by just cooking at home. And you could do it by month, but you could show people how much if they eat at home, and you could all do this yourselves, how much you would save in the next 10 years by eating at home versus a restaurant. It's profound. Tens of thousands of dollars. What would you do with that money? And then we do want people to have a goal to save for, and we do go with a user-friendly budget as part of the SAFE. And for a lot of people, and again, Lauren will talk about this in more detail in a little bit, a lot of people, this is the first time they've ever done a budget. So it's a really helpful exercise because there's both expenses and also income. This is the expenses part. I mentioned this before, but there are lots of ways. This is for people with psychiatric disabilities who could use different work incentives that the Social Security Administration has. This is one of them. And I think one of the things that we impress upon all the people who do the intervention, that they will have more money in their pockets if they work. And I think that that's been helpful in also disabusing beneficiaries of thinking that they're going to automatically lose their benefits if they work. A lot of people unfortunately think that. We're going to get more into this, but there are so many scams, and we try to give some principles for helping individuals with psychiatric disabilities and mental illness to avoid scams. And we give a lot of education about different kinds, and I'll ask a lot of questions that we're hoping that when they're asked, if they get it right, that's great. But if not, by beginning to provide this protection from oneself, the idea is that then we're going to give some ideas about anytime they don't initiate some kind of interaction that involves money or their identity, and they're not in a reputable place, then they might be at risk of being scammed. Next. And then just connecting, there are a number of resources out there. There are some people with mental illness that don't have disability yet, and there are programs to help people get disability. SOAR, for example, helps with the Social Security process. Or HUD has free housing counselors. They also provide financial counseling at minimal cost, and debt reduction, many of them too. And so also the Department of Labor has American Job Centers. There are 2,300 of them. Type in a zip code and you could help. They help people get jobs. They help with resume writing. They help with interviewing skills. They really are incredible. And so what we did find in our study is that when the participants used those skills those steps, then they actually did show these outcomes. They worked more. We did a test of their financial knowledge. They did better on it. They saved more, and they actually had less impulsive buying. So that was very encouraging. So that's how, we had this preliminary data on the use of SAFE that then Lauren took over.
So Eric and his colleagues published that paper in 2016, and then in 2017, I was a intern at UNC Butner, and Eric was one of my supervisors. And I was interested in SAFE, and because my mind was always going forensic, again, Eric's original SAFE study was with veterans with psychiatric disabilities. I was thinking, why don't we do this with forensic? Like, how many people are some kind of getting into the forensic system because of money problems, or maybe criminal legal involvement is really rooted in underlying social determinants of health, poverty, so on and so on. So this is nerdy me bugging Eric about trying to do SAFE with forensic. So as I started looking into this and thinking about, being in an inpatient hospital, mental health court, jail, prison, a lot of you all, most of you all, almost all of you all, and the participants are practitioners. We often have, do you have a payee on the intake form? We have questions about money, probably not enough, which we'll talk about in a second. But I started to think about all of these financial destabilizers that really impact this population that could be essentially explaining some variants of how folks are landing in front of us in these forensic and carceral contexts. So this paper by Gary Cuddeback and colleagues, they've published several papers on financial issues, SOAR, so on and so on, with people with criminal legal involvement. And there really is unique destabilizers. So, one of the many brutal things about the many misdemeanors that people with SMI are being arrested with is you go to jail, so you can't bond out. If you're in there for 30 days, you can lose your benefits or your housing or your job. And so if you're cycling through that misdemeanor SMI cycle, you're going to have all of these extra destabilizers that are just those social determinants of health and social determinants of criminal legal involvement. So all of these things are coming together. Cuddeback and colleagues did look at mental health court participants, so that kind of got in my mind about that population, and they asked them about their money management strategies, and that's exactly what they found. They didn't have money management strategies. They didn't just know much about budgeting and all of the things that Eric just reviewed for the modules for SAFE. Criminal legal involvement. I'm sure that you all are familiar and have had folks that, trying to do case management or set goals. It's harder for them to find a job. It's harder for them to find housing, so on and so on, with the history of criminal legal involvement. And we saw that playing out in those tables and charts that Eric showed earlier. I visited a jail with my colleague Daniel Murray about a year ago, and it was competency related. And the psychiatrist there said almost everyone with criminal trespass is on the IST wait list. And really, a lot of that has to do with someone's unhoused, or someone is not allowed to go into Starbucks anymore to use the bathroom because Starbucks is irritated with them, or they're scaring people, and so on and so on. So it's all of these like pathways for how to get in trouble that have to do with finances and poverty. So there's a complicated relationship between debt and crime, but they feed each other. Debt's a risk factor for crime, and crime's a risk factor for debt. What is totally shocking is that, this was 2017, 2018, when we were getting interested in this, but there were no interventions for people in the criminal legal system and money. And it just seems so obvious. Like, we didn't really have to do this presentation and show you all of these charts and tables, like, this, right? But it just seems so wild that this is not a key component of recovery-oriented services and trying to reduce recidivism. So SAFE is actually a one-time intervention. So, Eric showed the findings from his 2016 study. It packs a lot of punch for, one session, which, depending on how chatty someone is, or maybe how much they need to learn, or how impaired they might be, it can be 1 to 3 hours. It's usually falling around an hour and a half. Thinking about that and forensic workforce shortage, everyone's under-resourced, everyone has too many clients and are understaffed, started to think that this could be really fitting for the forensic population, also in terms of thinking about resources and what we can do. So in terms of the R&R model, I was kind of interested in that mental health court piece based on Dr. Cuddeback's paper and findings. If you're thinking about, someone's level of risk, so someone in mental health court isn't going to be at super high risk, right? If they're in mental health court, then there's reasonable risk, but not so much that it's a very, very high likelihood that someone will be reoffending, whether it's violence or not. We know that for almost everyone, looking at these studies over and over again, that finances are an issue for people that are in the forensic system in some way. So identifying that need and then matching it, and SAFE is a good match for that. And it's low resource, and it can be very specific, because it's not just, okay, you have money issues, so we're going to give you this financial intervention. It's really driven by the SAFE client, is what we refer to people as. So, Eric showed that budget a little bit earlier. There was money for cigarettes and lottery tickets on there. And this isn't supposed to be about, no, you shouldn't do that. I mean, people are going to spend their money. There's motivational interviewing and tactics and behavioral chains and things like that to get people to think about how they're using their money. That this is very person-centered, person-directed, and respecting that person's decisions. Usually, once you're making the budget, they kind of realize some things are needs versus wants, and that helps. But we got interested, and I was able to convince Eric to do this forensic thing. So we applied for a grant with the Bureau of Justice Assistance. to implement SAFE in 3 mental health courts in Alabama. So Jefferson County, Shelby County, and Tuscaloosa County. This is an effective implementation trial, meaning that we are testing the effectiveness of SAFE with this group while also seeing, can we actually implement it, thinking about those low resources. And this is a implementation science design where you do these 2 things at once. This makes sense too, just for forensic, in terms of you can't randomize people to participate in research if they're mandated in mental health court. We just thought that this process would work pretty well. So we have a couple study goals. One is to adapt SAFE for this population. So thinking more about that R&R piece. Eric's original study was veterans with psychiatric disabilities. When we looked back at his data set, there were a percentage of folks that did have criminal legal involvement, not a huge proportion of that population, but we did see it there, and we saw that they were using some SAFE skills later on in the outcome study. So we wanted to focus on more of that risk stuff and adapt SAFE accordingly. We were going to provide the services of SAFE in the mental health court, recognizing that, first of all, we don't know if it works. There's no reason to think that it's going to be iatrogenic, but we didn't want to, dump on our community partners here. Now you get to do this this intervention because the researchers want to do it. We're providing that service for folks. We wanted to co-design the program with the participants and the case managers. Talk about that in a second. And we wanted to think about sustainability. So great, it's cool if this intervention works, but if it actually can't carry on, who cares? So we're constantly thinking about sustainability as we're building out the program. As I said, very person-centered, person-directed. After that first session with SAFE, we say, tear it apart. Tell us everything, what's wrong. And then we also meet them a month later and say, hey, what didn't you need? What do you wish you had? What SAFE skills did you use? And of course, we're giving a battery of various tests, from MOCAs to financial knowledge quizzes and things like that. And then we're also following up at 6 months, asking them for more feedback, a little motivational interviewing to see if we can carry on the effects of SAFE. And we're hypothesizing that at 1 year follow-up, the folks that had SAFE are going to be less likely to be rearrested while in the mental health court. It's really important to us to get the feedback from the people that are actually going through this. We'll see in a second that just looking to the evidence-based research doesn't always show you and tell you what you need to know from people's perspectives. And so this gets overlooked way too much, but it's pretty wild that researchers don't include people that are actually going through this stuff and assume that they have the answers. So we are really excited to work with folks on our research team. I love my little trick that I like to do with this, but there is a saying in implementation science literature that it takes 17 years to implement a new evidence-based intervention. And that's not specific to forensic. So if it's 17 years just for general mental health or cancer interventions, anything like that, imagine what it is for forensic, which always gets the kind of lack of workforce, all of that kind of stuff, resources. So I'm willing to bet that it was more than 17 years. So I'm going to give you 3 things and you all tell me which was 17 years ago. The first iPhone was released. So we're thinking this long ago, and then an intervention's just now being implemented. The first hashtag, back when it was called Twitter, I know that wasn't that long ago, and Superbad was a hit. I don't know if anyone wants to take a guess. I'm not supposed to be looking at the chat now anyway. Well, the answer is that it's all of them. All of them were 17 years ago. And that feels like a really long time. We can't wait that long to give folks this intervention that is so obvious and really needs to be informed by the people that are going through it. both the clients and the case managers. So we piloted SAFE with women at the University of Alabama. This is my old lab. And we did just what I said, gave them the SAFE intervention, said, tear it up, tell us everything that's wrong. And we learned so much from these women that participated in this pilot from, hey, this stuff's cool, but I don't even have an ID. I just got out of prison. Or this one woman here in the red was talking a lot about financial abuse and how her partner really was in charge of her money. It wasn't her choice, but she had a really difficult relationship. We also talked about people's parents misusing their money. We just got a lot of good stuff to go ahead and inform and revise SAFE before launching it in the mental health courts. So a couple things that, well, a lot of things, I guess, we didn't know what we didn't know. My first meeting with one of the judges from the Jefferson County Court is we give a lot of defense counsel, DAs, judges, everyone the SAFE manual and say, tear it up. And Judge Wallace from Jefferson County Mental Health Court said, yeah, your budget thing's cool, but you don't have anything about court fines in there. And that's huge. And it's so relevant for everyone. So we were like, okay, we have to include that. There's also strange fees for when people get out of prison in Alabama. There's essentially like a tax every time they use this money card. We didn't know about that. We have to factor that in. So all of this stuff has been really informative. Also, as Eric mentioned earlier, the scams are just getting more and more creative. This is a text that one of our research assistants, a SAFE coordinator, received. You know, if you're getting something like that and you're not savvy about scams, that could potentially be something that you fall for and pay. We also found that there's a lot of folks with medical bills. We were informed that we really need to be thinking about like Cash App and how people spend that. I mean, all of your money on your phone right there, that could be very impulsive. Ooh. I'm going to play this really quickly. This is purposefully messy. That's what's so tricky about it. So see if you can hear. I got this message and I had to testify in 2 days. So I was like, what? I've got these people calling me? I need to figure this out.
Hello, Ms. Boyce. I'm Detective Luke Smith, Police Department. All in regards to the private matter in which does require immediate attention. However, at your earliest convenience, please give me a contact call back here, my direct dash line, 205-573-1979, 205-573-1979. Thank you.
So I've gotten a couple of those, and it's kind of mushy in the beginning, and then it says this is Detective blah, blah, blah from the blah, blah, blah police department. And imagine if you were someone enrolled in mental health court and don't want to get cited or go back to jail, and you're getting a call from a police department. Essentially what they end up doing is they try to get you to bring them gift cards or something like that. But while I was working on this PowerPoint, I got one of these sketchy text messages. I mean, they're everywhere. So as we're thinking just about like modernizing what scams to cover, that's becoming more and more relevant. Our folks told us that, you know, our planned incentives missed the mark. So when we were, you know, one of our, Catherine Esbenshade, one of our research assistants, really went to the literature and said, what seems to work as an incentive for folks in forensic settings to participate in research? Because the judges weren't mandating this. This was voluntary. And it seemed like Chick-fil-A cards or, you know, fast food gift certificates were what most folks in the research were doing for people that were under community supervision. And then our folks said like, oh, I need toilet paper. I need toothpaste, like Walmart. Chick-fil-A is nice, but so we give them that choice. And then also we just really embrace community-based participatory research in terms of we are providing this service. This is our job. We're researchers, but our community partners are not. They care very much about their folks, but they're not researchers. So this isn't their priority. So being really flexible and offering different kinds of services or compensation outside of what the grant parameters is something that we've been doing, and we really love our team. So this is an ongoing process. SAFE is a successive cohort design, so that means that it's constantly changing, constantly getting updated, and we'll just keep going until we're not getting any more, hey, this is wrong, hey, this is wrong, hey, you need to fix this, as we ask folks for ongoing feedback every time. And that's what we've got for you. Whoop. And this is your QR code.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lauren and Eric, for that thorough and helpful discussion there. We do have a couple of questions here already. In a little bit, we will be posting the link for the CE survey in the chat box, but like Lauren pointed up here, the QR code is directly accessible right now to you as well on the screen. Feel free to enter any questions that you have in the Q&A box. The limited people that did respond to your survey had a mix of guessing that the iPhone was the 2007 or all of them. So, really does highlight this point of, how long it can take for interventions. Somebody asked for a little bit more context on some of the terminologies you were using. So could you talk a little bit about SOAR and HUD in particular?
Eric, you're the SOAR
Yeah.
and HUD guy. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, and also I was able to see that while you were talking. So I just posted links for those directories for everyone. But you could see that SOAR is a program through SAMHSA, and it actually also addresses one of the other questions. It actually specifically helps people who have experienced who have histories of homelessness and mental illness. It's called SSI, SSDI, Outreach, Access, and Recovery. And in every state, and you can go to the link I just sent and go to your state and find the caseworker resources. It really helps those populations at risk obtain benefits, Social Security benefits, so that they could get at least some kind of income and through SSI or SSDI. And then HUD, housing counselors, there are you can go to the link, type in your zip code, and you can begin to see all the free housing counseling. But it's called housing counseling. It definitely helps with homelessness and has a if you want, for home buying and rental assistance, but also has a lot of them have free financial counselors that help with budgeting. And I think that that's one of the things to underscore. That last step of the SAFE is resources. And I think there's, on the one hand, teaching financial education, and on the other hand, helping people access resources that will help them. And the SAFE facilitator can be the navigator of those and help those individuals with mental health problems and criminal legal involvement access both HUD and SOAR.
I'll jump in and say, we really love the how to work while still maintaining your disability, because that's empowering, and being employed is associated with lots of different kinds of positive mental health outcomes and lower recidivism. But we found out from one of the mental health court directors that they had someone on their caseload who was so proud of his job, and he had disability and he was working. He didn't realize that he couldn't work that much. He thought working a lot was a good thing, and he owed $20,000. And that's a lot of money to a lot of folks, but someone that doesn't make that much money is on disability, like that's never ending. And so, we were really glad to get him in and try to work with him on budgeting and getting out of it. But that's one incident in our one mental health court. That's happening other places. And so I think that that's an overlooked module. I think it's really important.
You were broaching this when you got into the risk need responsivity model and approach here. Somebody, if you could elaborate on, based on the working with a lot of unhoused, unsheltered folks, this person says financial planning piece can be quite difficult due to cognitive issues, homelessness for 20 to 30 years, substance abuse trauma, etc. What particular complications or recommendations would you have for people with those particularly unique needs? Of course, we're talking about severe mental illness and legal involvement here, so all these different complications. How do you account for that with financial planning?
So one of the, I did mention the MOCA, so we do keep that in mind in terms of where someone might be cognitively, and that is a repeat, so we can kind of track that over time. So we do keep that in mind in terms of, if someone can't pay attention, if they're having that much, neurocog deficits, then we wouldn't expect them to be able to encode all of this stuff at SAFE and remember it later on. But we're also, everyone's eligible for SAFE, so that's important. In terms of, the resources, we are soon going to be offering hopefully online, where folks can go online and say, this is what I need. It's Thursday night and I need something to eat. And I'm in this county, and then they can essentially just get, okay, here's where free food is on Thursday night, or here's where, the clothes closet is on Saturday, or something like that. So making that more targeted. In terms of budgeting, the substance use piece, we are working on a behavioral chain of looking backwards, of spending money, substance use, all of that kind of stuff tied together. If you're using substances, it makes you more impulsive. And thank you for mentioning the trauma piece. Cedric Capriola, who is our current SAFE facilitator, she's actually working on a paper and hopefully an APLS presentation that's going to be covering financial abuse among these populations, as well as cultural considerations for money management and how different groups and intersectional groups talk about money and those things. So we're working on it. Thanks for the question.
Along those lines, are there any particular financial literacy assessment tools you recommend for folks with mental illness or intellectual disability? This person adds, most measures seem to be geared toward the elderly.
Eric, do you want to talk
about? Yeah, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau it's 10 items. It's the financial well-being scale. It's really, and we've administered it to people across the board. So I think that is it gets at a lot of different components of financial well-being, and both objective financial situation and subjective perceptions of financial security, and whether or not people feel they can pay their. So I think that if you go there, it's a free. There's actually just last month an article breaking down, doing a cluster analysis of that data that really shows that scale gets at good constructs of financial well-being. So it's on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB's website, and it's called the Financial Well-Being Scale.
Financial well-being scale. All right, thank you.
Also, too, the LSCMI has financial items on it.
Yeah.
So showing that there is one paper that found that those items on the LSCMI are more predictive of recidivism for women than it is for men. That's one reason why we did the pilot with women first, because they have even more unique financial destabilizers. So there is a relatively recent paper that looked at those items on the LSCMI of case managers answering them, and those were predictive of whether someone was going to get rearrested. So that is embedded in some of the tools we use, although I know that that's not one of the most common ones that we're using in forensic more.
Noted. Yeah. Someone asked if there's any data as to the use of representative payees for SSI or SSD payment as improving outcomes.
There is data. There's a paper you could look it's on behavioral interventions for financial education this past year in psychiatric services that I co-authored, but it reviews a lot of the interventions. There have been some studies that have looked at the use of payees and the outcomes they have shown in at least one randomized trial that reduced substance use. But there are the other part of the payee question is a lot of times the family members are payees, and about 10, 15 years ago, published some research showing that it could be related to conflict and perceived coercion. And so I think that the best way to implement, if there is a payeeship, for it to be collaborative, where a person who's getting the benefits feels like they have a say in the budgeting. But there has been some research that has shown outcomes. There's more that's needed for sure, but it's been looked at.
Excellent. Somebody just noted that some of their prior work was on incarceration, women, and introducing a piece of reintegration programs for financial empowerment. And I guess this sparked a consideration of any preliminary discussion of individual differences or, demographic considerations of financial empowerment and particularly effective interventions for people of different backgrounds.
Take a look.
It's really not existing much. So Cidra's putting together a literature review on this
Yeah, we're doing that.
right now. Yeah, kind of sparked interest in for Cidra's work, and so she's really spearheading that. She's a second-year doctoral student at Alabama. So
Right. With substance use and health outcomes, does the research looking at harm reduction, housing first models, and how to integrate financial literacy?
sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Regarding substance use and health outcomes, does the research look at harm reduction and housing first models and how to integrate financial literacy into those?
I haven't seen much. I mean, there's some folks in Europe that are doing some cool stuff. And some of the lead data out of Seattle is integrating some of this because it's so focused on harm reduction, so important. But I'll say that as a forensic psychologist who writes reports to the court, so often mitigation evaluations, I'm teaching attorneys and judges about harm reduction. Like even the first time I did it, it was 6 weeks into the new year. And I said, how many people have given up on their resolution already? Like, imagine if you had to maintain that for the rest of your life. It's really hard. People are going to slip up in all of these different ways. And so contextualizing the social determinants of health, including this money issue in harm reduction, is really important in our practice.
Wonderful. One final question here. Somebody noted enjoying the presentation, saying when you're done with severe mental illness in forensic populations, this information will be great for college students as well, which prompts a consideration perhaps of primary prevention. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on any considerations or additional complications about such a model being used for more primary prevention related measures, getting to people early, pre-hospitalization, mental health services, pre-incarceration.
I mean, why most of us don't learn this in school is wild. I mean, I make dumb money mistakes all the time, and I'm like, how am I a PI of a financial empowerment intervention? So I totally get it. I mean, I'm really interested in, if this works, putting it as part of a package intervention for folks that are incompetent and going back into the community and trying to protect them from more destabilizers as they return. Again, I'm a competency lady, so I'm thinking about it like that. But yeah, earlier interventions, absolutely. If anyone wants to take up on that.
Yeah, and I believe the Department of Education does have an initiative on college campuses where they do have they are doing both financial education, and I believe they're training older students to help with financial education, so with the younger students. So I think there are initiatives, and yeah, there's a lot of states now that are beginning to require financial education. My kids got classes that I never had, so yeah, I think it's super important to have it earlier.
Dr. Longquist, Dr. Eric Elbogen, Lauren and Eric, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information as well as the work that you're doing on this matter. Hopefully we can narrow in the 17-year window gap so that we can accelerate some of the potential impact of these areas into actual practice to improve people's lives. So thank you so much for going over all of this with all of us today. And
Thank
that wraps up this week's Law and Mental Health series. Next week, we'll have Dr. Aaliyah Rollaire and Dr. Danielle Rinchak. We'll be discussing practical applications of anti-racism into forensic mental health practice. We hope to see you then for another great discussion of issues in behavioral health and the law. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.